What we want to do today is to begin with reviewing a little bit of Hebrew, and then we're going to look at chapter 4 of Ruth. And if you've got one of these, this is the chapter that we will be using once again. But let's just review the words a sentence at a time. Hine matov. Hine matov. Hine matov umanaim. Shevet achim. Now let's get a good achim. Shevet achim. There it is. That's good. Shevet achim gam yachad. All right, excellent. Now we'll sing through it. Here we go. Which means, behold how good and how pleasant when God's people dwell together. Let's begin with prayer. Gracious God, we thank you for the beginning of another day, another week. We pray for those who are in special needs at this time. Be with our Pastor Vern. Give him good healing. With others whom we name in our hearts. And now be present as we listen to these ancient words. Let them become for us words of life. All right. Amen. Amen. Now, the magazine that is, we do have a new microphone. Thank you very much, Enid, or somebody got this for us. The most popular and influential magazine in Protestant Christianity is the Christian Century, which came 2 days ago. I get it over at our place. And in it there is a sermon here by a woman named Stephanie Powell, who is campus pastor at Harvard Divinity School. Now, of all things that she chooses a text from Judges. And she says, this recently we held a Shatter the Silence Sunday, which drew a record crowd in Cambridge, in the sanctuary, and online. She preached that day on Judges 19, a text of terror. Many have told her they've never heard anybody preach on before. Well, the point is that this text, we could read it, but we won't read it now. But it talks about a terrible kind of murder and sexual assault. And there are a number of these in the book of Judges. The stories about animals being killed needlessly, people being killed in wars, concubines. This one in chapter 19 is about a concubine who is killed and in fact is sexually assaulted. We won't read through it, and if you don't know what a concubine is, I don't think I knew till I was in my mid-20s, perhaps. But you can find out what a concubine is. But chapter 19 of Judges is something you can look at later. But the reason that I mention that is because when we come to the book of Ruth, it is exactly right just about after Judges chapter 19, which is the story of a concubine who is terribly murdered. So we've got some things going on here that are not very pleasant. we just have to remember that the Bible is not telling us how we ought to behave, but it's showing the way people really did behave in those days. And if you remember at the end of the chapter, it said there was no king in Israel in those days. Well, all right. Now our objective for today is to look at chapter 4 of Ruth. So if you look at this sheet that you have, if we look at chapter 4, you remember what has happened up to this time. Ruth has been, she and her mother-in-law made a plot, and Ruth went and she crawled in Boaz's sleeping bag with him, you know, at night, and out at the threshing place. Now, and what she says, he wakes up and he discovers there's a woman in bed with him, and he says, "Who are you? What are you doing?" And she says, "I'm Ruth. Will you marry me?" There. So Ruth, there she goes. How many Ruths do we have in this group here? We've got a couple of Ruths. A middle name named Ruth. We do have Ruths, is a good Christian name. Some of our best Jewish friends in St. Paul are the Paradises. Isn't that a nice, or no, not Paradise, Martha. Ruth Citron, the Citrons, very Citron. And her name is Ruth. So it's a name that's still used either in Christians or by Jewish people. And we're going to take a look now. Ruth has said to Boaz, "Marry me." And he says, "I will, but I have to first of all clear things up." Remember, with some other relatives who are closer relatives, and they have first right on the field that you're going to buy and on you, Ruth. So they say, all right, we better get this straightened out. Now let's take a look at Ruth chapter 4, and here we have a rather unusual description, but a description of, this legal procedure. So let's have somebody from over here read. Who would like to read the first few verses? Okay, good.
Boaz went straight to the public square and took his place there. Before long, the closer relative, the one mentioned earlier by Boaz, strolled by. "Step aside, old friend," said Boaz. "Take a seat." The man sat down. Boaz then gathered 10 of the town elders together and said, "Sit down here with us. We've got some business to take care of." And they sat down.
All right. Now, there were in the days of the Old Testament, there are two kinds of cities. Oh, your good friend Ben. He's fixing the flat tire here. Thank you very much. If you look at Leviticus 25, there's some Bibles sitting around. If you look at Leviticus 25, it tells that there are two types of cities in Israel of that day. There is Leviticus 25:25, I think it is. There are walled cities, which the walls are like this, and then there's an overlap here. They have a gate here, and this area right here is the gate area. It is the place you go for legal procedures. And so when you hear about the court in the gate, that's what we've got going. Who's got Leviticus 25 and can read a little bit of that for us? Okay, please.
If any of you Israelites become so poor that you are forced to sell your property, your closest relative must buy it back. If that relative has the money, later don't have the money to pay the present owner a fair price, you will have to wait until the year of celebration when the property will once again become yours.
Okay, Leviticus 25, 29 I've got. Pick it up please at 29.
If you sell a house in a walled city, you have only 1 year in which to buy it back.
Okay, if you sell a house in a walled city, that's what we've got here. Bethlehem, we're told later on, is a walled city. And then read 31, please.
But a house out in a village may be bought back at any time, just like a field, and it must be returned to its original owner in the year of celebration.
Okay, and verse 31, but homes in villages that have no walls about them. So there are either walled cities or cities without walls. And the point is that the court meets in that opening place here. And archaeologists have found in a number of cities in ancient Israel, they have found places where there are benches and there are seats for 12 people, or 10 people. 10 elders. You had to get 10 people that own property, 10 elders, seat them, get them settled down, and they will be the jury, so to speak, for what's going on here. All right, well, let's continue with verse 3, 20 of Ruth 4.
Boaz then said to his relative, the piece of property that belonged to our relative Elimelech is being sold by his widow Naomi, who has just returned from the country of Moab.
All right, remember Naomi has come back. Naom Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. Naomi has returned. Continue.
I thought you ought to know about it. Buy it back if you want it. You can make it official in the presence of those sitting here and before the town elders. You have first redeemer rights. If you don't want it, tell me so I'll know where I stand. You're first in line to do this, and I'm next after you. He said, I'll buy it.
All right, he says, the person coming by says, I'll buy it, but then Boaz added, continue.
Okay. You realize our dead relative, along with the redeemer responsibility to have children with her to carry on the family inheritance. Then the relatives say, oh, I can't do that. I've jeopardized my own family's inheritance.
Yeah, if I'm going to have to buy this field, and if I'm going to have to make this kind of a deal, it's going to jeopardize the inheritance that I have with my family. Continue.
You go ahead and buy it. You can have my rights. I can't do it. In the olden times in Israel, this is how they handled official business regarding matters of property and inheritance. A man would take off his shoe and give it to the other person.
Now, I thought of bringing my sandals along and taking it off and giving it to the pastor sitting in the front seat here, but I thought, I don't really need to do that. You get the idea. That's what they would do. Take off your shoe and give it to somebody to seal the deal. Continue.
This was the same as an official seal or a personal signature in Israel. So when Boaz's redeemer relative said, go ahead and buy it, he signed the deal by pulling off his shoe. Boaz then addressed the elders and all the people in the town square that day. You are witnesses today that I have bought from Naomi everything that belonged to Elimelech and Kilion and Mahlon, including responsibility for Ruth the foreigner, the widow of Mahlon. I'll take her as my wife and keep the name of the deceased alive along with his inheritance. The memory and reputation of the deceased is not going to disappear out of this family or from his hometown. To all this you are witnesses this very day.
Now let's all read, starting with verse 11, just so we get that in front of us. Pick it up. All the people in the town square that day, backing up the elders, said, "Yes, we are witnesses. May God make this woman who is coming to her husband. May God make you a pillar in Ephrathah and famous in Bethlehem. With the children of God gives you from this young woman. May your family rival the family of Perez, the son Tamar bore to Judah." So there it is. They're going to get this deal settled, and so Ruth, you see, will be property of Boaz. Okay. Well, then it says here, Boaz married Ruth. She became his wife. Boaz slept with her. By God's gracious gift, she conceived and had a son. Now, storytellers, can do one thing quite easily, and that is accelerate time. Here's an example of time acceleration. And what happens here? It's all of a sudden in just one sentence, we've got a good 9 months summarized. So Boaz married Ruth. She became his wife. He slept with her. By God's gracious gift, she conceived and bore a son. So, there we are. Now, verse 14. The town women said to Naomi, "Blessed be God. He doesn't leave you without family to carry on your life. May this baby grow up to be famous in Israel. He'll make you young again. He'll take care of you in your old age." We live over with some of you here at the Waters, and it's always nice to see a grandma or grandpa pushing a baby around or playing catch with him with a football out in the yard in ancient days when I used to do that. Anyway, and this daughter-in-law who has brought him into the world and loves you so much, well, she's worth more to you than 7 sons. Let's go a little bit further. Somebody from over here who would like to read, starting with verse 16. Please.
Naomi took the baby and held him in her arms, cuddling him, cooing over him, waiting on him hand and foot. The neighborhood women started calling him Naomi's baby boy, but his real name was Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. This is the family tree of Perez. Perez had Hezron. Hezron had Ram. Ram had Aminadab.
Good.
Aminadab had Nahshon. Nahshon had Salmon. Salmon had Boaz. Boaz had Obed. Obed had Jesse, and Jesse had David.
All right, so you see, it brings us right up to the time of David. Good reading on all those names.
Where'd all the girls go?
Easy. What did you say?
Where'd all the girls go?
Oh, yeah.
In my business, they were the ones that had.
All right. Well, Obed had Jesse, and Jesse had David. And that's the end of the story. Well, now, look at the white sheet that I gave you. That's kind of the summary of what we're doing, or of how we look at the book of Ruth. And we just looked at scene 4 at the court at the gate, chapter 4, 1 through 12, and then the business about getting the marriage settled and figured out. And I said here, conclusion, what is a Führungsgeschichte? And I see that Phil saw this question coming up because he knows that I'm going to ask him that
Where's
question.
the word again?
You don't have to do it. It's the Führungsgeschichte, which is the conclusion. Really, Führung means to lead. And
Yeah, the story of leadership.
yeah, the story of leadership. And if you are in Germany, where many of us have gone to study Bible, you discover that this is one of the words used to describe what we've got, the material we're dealing with in the Bible. And here it's a Führungsgeschichte. What does that mean, Phil? A Führungsgeschichte.
A succession narrative.
Yeah. Yeah, a narrative, a guidance story, a story of leadership, how God works to lead somebody through something which is an answer to prayer or something like that. Well, we have several of these. We have the story in the Old Testament of Joseph, and the whole story of how Joseph gets to be the leader in Egypt, and God has been guiding him all the way through this. Well, here, if you look at chapter 1 of Ruth, verse 9, if somebody's got that, you can find it in your blue sheet here, or whatever. Let's just read through that verse. Who's got 9 and 10? One of you, okay, go ahead, please. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry. I'll start with 8 because I don't know where 9 actually
Yeah,
starts.
that's good, you can't tell on these.
After a short while on the road, Naomi told her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, go home and live with your mothers, and may God treat you as graciously as you have treated your deceased husbands and me. May God give each of you a new home and a new husband." She kissed them, and they cried openly.
So this is a prayer, really, that Naomi prays here. And she says to her daughters-in-law, "Go back home and live with your mothers." And she kissed them goodbye, and they all are crying out there. And they said, "No, we want to go back with you," and so on. But Naomi says, "No, you go back and don't stay with me." And you remember this part. Well, how is this prayer answered? If you look at the story, you see that it is answered when a baby is born at the end of the book. A child is born, and the child's name is what?
Obed.
Yeah, Obed. Okay. Well, so that's the story, and then we're going to say something about what the story could mean for us. But anybody have any comments, questions, whatever, about the story thus far? Yes.
This is just about Orpah.
Yeah.
What if she would have come back with Ruth? Then what would have been the rules of
Yeah.
for Boaz then?
Yeah, I don't know what that would have meant.
And I assume we never heard anything more about Orpah.
We don't hear any more. Well, on the other hand, we do hear a lot, but 2 of the consonants are reversed. Well, and it's true. If you take a look in the, if you Google Oprah as in Winfrey, you see that it's Orpah, but it's mixed around. And I once took a course at the University of Michigan on a course on linguistics, and the thing they said is that metathesis, which means switching letters around, is directly proportional to the number of liquid consonants in a word. Now, what's that all about? If you have words with L, M, N, or R, these are called liquids. If you have those, you're very likely to get the letters mixed. For example, you buy a house from a realtor, but often people don't say realtor, they say realtor, yeah. Or it used to be who? Well, I think it was the second President Bush who would talk about nuclear warfare. And you see, when there's L's and R's, there's a tendency to switch them around. And when I've had to give a speech someplace, I've always checked in any of those with those letters in them. You always want to be sure that you get it right. Well, that's what is going on here. In this particular story, where was my example now? Yeah, Ruth, yeah, Orpah. Ruth and Orpah. So it's Orpah or Oprah. Okay. It's hard to keep those straight. Now, the point is that you all have, or you have access to a Bible, and Les Hornfett has got one here in Arabic in front of him. I would have him read it, but our time is running a little bit. I can't read it, but it is Arabic. Somebody's been reading Arabic down here in the church basement. But the point is that this is the Bible, and it has something to say to us, and that's meaningful for us, and that shows us how we should live, or has some sort of word from God for us. Well, what have we got here? I've got something written down here, a comment from an 8-year-old, a model short story. A comment from an 8-year-old. I had a project going a number of years ago where I was going to write Bible stories for our grandchildren and have them read one each day and see what they mean for us. Well, I did that, and then I just was checking on these kids. I wondered if they really read them. You know, I got up at 5:30 each morning, gave myself 1 hour to do to read the story. So they were doing it, and we visited them, and they were reading these stories. And I said to one of them, I said, "Well, how do you like these stories?" "Oh, we like them very well, Grandpa." And I said, "Oh yeah, what? Do you read them?" "Yes, we read them." "And how do you like them?" "Yes, I like them very well." "But what do you like about them?" And this guy, at the age of 8, who is now kicker for the Limburg football team, but he actually said this. He said, "I like them very well, but I like them both best, excuse me. I like them very well, but I like them best when they're about me." See? That's true. I like and that's because I would put in the Bible stories. Now, Joseph had some sons, and their names were Ben. Here's Ben up here. You know, and so when I put the names of the kids in the story, they liked him a lot better, as you can understand. You don't want to just hear, you know, I hear sermons a lot of times, and I think they never get out of Palestine. They're just too boring. They don't. But anyway, I like them best when they're about me. And now, as we look at this story, we see that there are really 2 love stories here, I'm saying. First of all, there's the story of Ruth and Boaz. Now, in what way is that a love story? Well, it tells how these two meet and how they fall in love and how they marry and have children. So that, in a way, the whole story answers what we have in chapter 1, verse 9, may the Lord bless you. But then there is even more. We have here a genealogy of who?
Jesus.
Jesus, yeah. And before that, the genealogy goes through David. So we have the genealogy of King David, also of Jesus. And these couple of love stories. Well, I put some of these things down in a book, which is out of print. As one of my teachers used to say, all the good books are out of print. But this Old Stories for a New Time, I went through this story and pointed out what it has to say for our time. 2 love stories. And I said here, what we discover in this story about prayer. The story gave us a hint of Naomi's prayer for her daughter-in-law. She said, "May the Lord make it possible for each of you to marry again." Remember chapter 1, verse 9? And the story goes on to show how this is answered, this prayer. Now, any comments? What might this say for 2 things? First, for the story in the Bible as a whole, and secondly, for the story that you might have in your life. Pardon me, I'm getting laryngitis. What might this story have to say?
Maybe like the importance of loyalty in your family, the way that her daughter-in-law would be willing to help her mother-in-law,
Yeah,
the way that Boaz was willing to help her even though she was kind of this different tribe, that he had compassion on her, and it all seemed to have rather more compassion than, say, self-interest.
yeah. Yeah, compassion, love for one another. The mother-in-law for the daughter-in-law. Most often this, entreat me not to leave you and all this, this is used, at least by Christians, most often in what setting? Weddings. Yeah. But really, here, it's the love between a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law, right? Yeah. Anything else? What
Respect.
else do you see in this story that might have something to say to us? Yeah.
Respect for tradition
Ah.
and for family, and how the importance of caring for each other that we've lost in today's world.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, tradition, the importance of hearing these things, thank you very much. Anything else in the story of Ruth as you see it here?
Susan over there.
That,
Susan?
yeah, that we don't know the end of the story. Because
Uh-huh.
as you read Ruth, it could have ended with the death of the husbands. It could have ended on the road to the village. It could have ended, any number of places, but we don't know the endings of our stories.
Yeah. Yeah, this story, in a way then, the story of Ruth here is marked to be continued, because we don't know how it's going to end up. Good. Anything else? Yes.
But I guess it's reading to me, my parents in my ear, was the Lord helps those who help themselves.
Yeah.
Because Ruth and Naomi weren't exactly passive in this. They were pretty aggressive about making sure that it happened. So, again, I can hear my father saying, you can't just sit on your duff and expect it to show up.
Okay. All right, good, yes.
I actually have a Ruth story. My grandmother was named Ruth,
Yeah.
and she was Methodist, and she married ALC Lutheran. This would have been back in the 1910s, and she was the first woman to walk to the other side of the aisle to sit with her husband. Because in those
Oh,
days,
is that right?
Lutheran churches, men on one side, women on the other. And when I read Ruth, I think of my grandmother being a foreigner on the other side of the church.
Yeah, right. That's good. And does this, yes, comment.
I find it curious that we don't see many books in the Bible that are named after a woman. And I think that there's a real strength and message in this.
Yeah, how many books in the Bible are named after a woman? We've got Ruth, Esther, and that is absolutely all. Am I correct? It's a very male-dominated society, and the whole thing is male-dominated, is it not? This sermon by this woman preached at Harvard, who preached at Harvard. Now there are all kinds of books coming out, as you've perhaps noticed. You can find them at Barnes & Noble or whatever, but about stories and about women particularly. So things are changing. Things are changing. Well, anything else? Ruth, Esther, and if we were, yeah, Phil, go ahead.
I want to go back to Führungsgeschichte.
I knew you'd like to say that.
You just like saying it.
We want the umlaut.
Yeah.
But I think that whole God is only mentioned in the mouths of others who say things about God. But the narrator doesn't say God did anything.
Yeah, in this story of Ruth, there are only two places where God is the actor. 1:9, which we've got here in chapter 4, when the Lord blessed, when he blesses Ruth and she has a child. Yeah.
So it's very cautious about people like, I'm thinking of that book by Kate Bowler.
Yes.
People want to say it had God, this had to happen, or they're very reluctant to attribute things to God. They're very cautious. And that's what.
Yeah, and the book by Kate Bowler, which you and I have both read, is about a woman who gets cancer, right?
Yep.
She just finishes her doctoral thesis at Duke or someplace, and what happens? She gets cancer. And her question is, why would God let this happen? And
Everything happens for a reason.
Mhm.
And the title is Everything Happens for a Reason, and Other Lies I Believe.
Yes, and other lies I believed. Yeah.
Naomi had kind of given up on God. She was pretty annoyed with what she'd been through. She was bitter.
Yeah, she came home, she said, why call me Naomi? Why in the world are you calling me happy?
Yeah.
Because I'm not happy? I am rather bitter.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But she kind of made a turnaround once things started to improve.
yeah,
for her.
once they picked up.
But she still persisted. She wasn't going to give up. It was that she knew she needed to persist.
Well, anybody else? So why are we doing Ruth? Because I got a phone call from Bob Morris. I haven't seen Bob for a while now. But he said we're going to do a study of Ruth in next January, and and so he divided it up among preachers and so on, little knowing what was going to happen, right? Yes.
In
Wait.
chapter 4, verse 14, it ends, this child will be famous in Israel.
Yeah.
You know what the Hebrew word, that seems like a strange translation, will be famous in Israel. Can you get back to where?
You know, I don't have my Hebrew Bible with me. It's sitting on my desk.
There's an Arabic one.
There's an Arabic. Oh. All right, let's just check on this. Yes, the word means to be happy or satisfied. That's what you do when you're a teacher. But I'll check it, we can look,
It
Dwayne.
seems like a rather flimsy
Yeah.
phrase.
Yeah, it does. Sound like flimsy praise.
I think another part of the story is the overcoming of shame. Because the widow, we all know the Bible stories where the widows are shamed, and that's why the Luke 18, the widow who goes to the judge overcomes her shame to do that. Here we have women who are alone, and even Ruth's approach to Boaz, uncovering his feet, and that's what the Hebrew means there, his feet, right?
You're right, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, anybody else have a comment or question? Well, I think there are all sorts of courses now being offered on women in the Bible, or women running through history, yes.
I just thought of this when Enid mentioned persistent, and among women right now, there's, somebody sent me, it was just kind of this sticker put out somewhere, but it's called Nevertheless She Persisted.
Yes.
And it's actually a reference to Elizabeth Warren, who
Oh.
stood up in the Senate and wanted to read something, and it was by Martin Luther, no, by Martin Luther King's wife, Coretta Scott King. And Mitch McConnell tried to shut her up, and she kept reading. And so then later on, he was trying to diss her by saying, you know, I told her to sit down, she was supposed to sit down, but nevertheless she persisted.
There, yeah, that's become a slogan,
Now it's
hasn't
a
it?
slogan,
Yeah.
and women have picked this up, and I had a woman friend who's actually a Native American sent me one of these too, and it was kind of fun, but as you're saying, I mean, these were not passive women, they both Naomi and Ruth, they had agency. Naomi had an idea and a sense of the culture and what could happen, and helped Ruth to then play out that role, and so in that sense, nevertheless, they both persisted. And that just
It's
struck me.
interesting, if you were to look at the Old Testament, there is one particular chapter which mentions the characteristics of a good wife. What is that? Proverbs 31. Well, if you look through that, it's interesting for a number of reasons. It goes through the alphabet. It goes A, B, C, D, Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, or I could take it out of the Hebrew Bible, or I mean, Arabic, yes, thank you very much. But if you look at that, everybody says this is not a very realistic picture, you know. But one thing she does, she considers a field and buys it. She's not just a passive woman, but she is one who deals in real estate. So, you know, and if you look through the Bible and look through the Old Testament, you will find examples of that sort of thing happening. So, well, good enough. I think our time is up. And nice to be with you for these sessions. What comes up next, Ina? Do you know what's up next week?
I don't recall.
Yeah, well, whatever. All right.
Thank you for being here.
Yes, glad I could be here.
That's right.
Intergenerational.